welcome everyone to the .NET user group. Thanks for all coming. The event space will eventually not have a maze to get in, but it's a litmus test to see how smart we are. There's brownies for the in-person people. Online, you don't get one. A couple of notes for the end of this year. Kevin is going to be giving our last .NET user group talk on what's new. So if you guys don't know, November is the release time for .NET 10, C# 14. And Kevin's going to be reviewing some of the new cool things that are coming out. So please attend. It's already on Meetup. I'll do an announcement after this, and we'll go from there. But today we're going to be hearing from Ben Michaelis on MCP Servers, kind of continuing our trend of AI-powered talks. So Ben, take it away.
Fantastic. Thanks for the introduction, Dan. I'm Ben Michaelis, or Benjamin, whatever you prefer. You guys maybe have not seen me on this stage before. I'm a software engineer here at Intelitech, and I'm also the primary maintainer of Essential C#, which is a book and also online resource kind of going beginner to expert. You can hop in wherever you're at over C#. So if you want to advance C#, go check it out. It's online. So MCP servers. We kind of have started this AI craze, obviously, a couple years ago. You might have noticed ChatGPT, all the things. Yes, tell me if it works, Phil. And with AI, we noticed that models were trained on some data. And at some point, that data became less and less relevant. I could no longer ask it, what's the news today? Because it only knew about the news 6 months ago. And I kind of make a correlation between the time that we're in now to a time in history with humans. Humans in history, we notice that we manifest our intelligence through tools. And so tools extend our capabilities. We have our hammers, we have our different tools, and it's really a defining characteristic of humans that I think is different than most other creatures. And the usage of tools in the same way, we're kind of at the same place in time with LLMs and AI. LLMs and AI are kind of in the Stone Age where they're starting to be able to figure out how to use tools and not just use them, but to build with them and think with them. So these tools in AI, I know I'm going very high level, but I want to make sure we're all on the same playing field here. They often are using this protocol called MCP, Model Context Protocol. That's essentially the toolbox that LLMs can call into. So this may be a tool of APIs or databases or automation scripts. And they're all wrapped in this standard protocol so that they're discoverable and used without writing a bunch of custom glue code that makes it very hard-coded. So with that, we're going to dive just into the MCP architecture as a whole to make sure we kind of understand we're on the same playing field before we actually dive into the code. So feel free to stop me, ask questions along the way. Anyone who's online, drop questions to Dan, and I'd be happy to do that. So the first part of our MCP architecture is our host. So this can be any AI application. This could be VS Code with the GitHub Copilot extension. This could be Claude Desktop, or insert however many more examples that there are out there today. Moving on from there, we start to have the server. So all an MCP server is really just a program or a service that provides some context and capabilities to the host. So it's basically just giving your existing chat window new functionality or new abilities that you didn't have before. Now, MCP follows the very typical client-server architecture pattern. So a host establishes connections to one or more MCP servers. This can be done among a variety of transportation types, whether it's standard I/O. So think like your typical interaction with a command line, where you have your command input, your command output, that's it. You can also have HTTP. So just like any website, you can open up an endpoint and interact with an MCP server over the internet or locally using HTTP. And this can still have your standard HTTP advantages, such as being able to put your MCP server behind some kind of authentication using like OAuth, for example. Ooh, don't scroll too quick if you're me. So today, we're going to really be focusing in on standard I/O and HTTP for our communication between the host and the MCP server. This is probably the two most standard ways of doing this today, and so we're going to focus in on those. So using standard I/O, obviously this means that your MCP server has to be running locally. You can't really do command line over the web. But you can also locally do HTTP. So if we're interacting with the MCP server using HTTP, it means it could be running both locally or on a remote machine. So it's just running, once again, like a website, has an endpoint available to it, available on the internet. And when we think about the architecture of MCP, there's some distinct decision points here of why you would choose local versus a remote MCP server. And one of the distinctions is what it can access. So a local MCP server can access your local data on your computer, as you would expect, once again, like any command line interface, anything running locally on your computer, such as your file system, Git, local database, as well as still anything available over the internet, just like you typically could. A remote MCP server, however, can still access all those remote resources, but now you only need one instance that multiple people can connect to. So instead of it sitting on your machine, you can have a shared instance of an MCP server, multiple people can connect to it, and then use some resources backed by a cloud database, your GitHub account. The options are infinite. So if we punch one level further, in this last step, we're kind of adding one little piece in here, the MCP client. And we notice it's still in the box of the application host process. So think about that still as your VS Code. But when that VS Code instance or similar establishes a connection to an MCP server, it does this by creating an MCP client. And there's one MCP client for every server. So you have your host, your AI application, and it spins up a client to be able to make that connection to the server, on and on and on. And all it's functionally doing is proxying calls between the host and the server, obtaining that connection and context for the host to use from the server. So I have flown through like a 500 mile an hour at a 500-foot level of MCP architecture. Are there any questions at this point about how that kind of works? I want to make sure we just have a shared understanding before we kind of dive in and start playing around with this. Great. So our first example today is going to be an example using the standard I/O as our communication between the host and your MCP server. In our case, our MCP server is aptly named MCP.NET Sample because that is today. It's going to be running our local machine, and we're going to communicate with it over standard I/O. So we're going to start by building out a simple tool, one that does addition for us. I don't know if you've ever tried to ask AI to do math, but it is horribly and notoriously bad at doing math. So we're going to give it a tool to allow AI to do some addition. So if you want to follow along, this link or QR code will bring you to the repo. I've cloned this locally already that we will walk through if you want to follow along. So any outstanding questions before we dive in? Got the link, QR code, ready to go. So jumping over to the code. So I have my VS Code instance running, and inside my MCP.NET sample project, I'm going to open up my program.cs file. This is a standard console app at this point, like a new console app, and all I've done is add in the MCP C# SDK package. And I've added this package to our project, and we can see its usage right here in the namespace, in the using statements. Looking at the code that I've written so far, so we have a main, and the only 3 lines of importance that make us able to be an MCP server versus just a console application are these 3. add MCP server with standard I/O server transport. All that's saying is we're not going HTTP, we're not going something else, we're sticking with standard I/O as our communication layer. And the last one is with tools from assembly. Now, the employed overload of with tools from assembly, what this is doing, it is looking for all classes. Let me lower this down. It's looking for all classes that have the MCP server tool type attribute on that class. When it sees the MCP server tool type attribute, it marks the class as a container for MCP tools. It tells the MCP server that this class contains one or more tool definitions that can be exposed to an AI system. And this tool is marked, as you may have noticed, by another attribute called MCP server tool. This declares the method as an MCP tool that can be invoked by the server in the AI clients. The last piece that we have is the description. This comes from our base class library from system component model. And this just provides a human-readable explanation of what the tool does. This description, which I will show here, this description can appear in your AI, can appear as we go inspect the MCP server, and this will help give some additional context instead of just the name as to what this tool does. So once again, if I just looked at this and went add, is this adding two strings together? Is this adding a number of other things? I'd have to guess that I'm pulling out the right tool, and the description gives a little extra help of, well, the function of this is adds to number. So when I'm given a job as the AI, I can choose the right tool out of my tool chest and say, this one makes sense for the job. So that's what with tools from assembly does. That's really all I've done here. So 3 lines of the method calls there in order to get a sub for MCP, the 2 attributes, and a method. That's it. So now that we have that, we can actually go take a look at what our tool looks like. So let's see what our MCP server looks like to an AI agent. To use this, we'll use a tool called MCP Inspector. And this is an interactive interface that allows you to test your MCP servers. It's kind of like Postman, except instead of, well, Postman's used to test REST APIs, you use MCP Inspector for your MCP servers. So you can validate that it works without having to go through an AI client, such as VS Code. So there's 2 ways to run MCP Inspector. You can either use npx or Docker. I'm going to use npx, and we're going to go that route. So I'm going to open up my command line terminal. And I'm going to select npx at model context protocol /inspector to install my tool. Well, that's installing. Any questions on what we're doing so far?
What's your project type for the MCP.NET sample?
Yeah.
Is that just an ASP.NET Core?
It's just
It's a console app.
It's just a console app. Just a console app, just an exe, brought in the SDK, made the appropriate calls. That's it.
And the MCP SDK is what's giving you those the add MCP server transports tools with assembly.
Yeah, so the question is, does the MCP SDK give us these methods, add MCP server methods? And the answer is yes. So that comes in through the MCP SDK. And that also is what gives us our attributes, this MCP server tool type attribute and the server tool ones, which is what the tool with tools from assembly looks for in order to populate it. So it's kind of magic. So you get to just tag your class with the tool type and then mark the tool on the method, and boom, they're exposed.
I will save my question for later.
Okay. Any other questions? So taking a look at the MCP Inspector, this is what MCP Inspector looks like when we first load it up. I maybe have a little bit more in here than you would, but when we open it up, it has a couple of options to configure it. So the first option is the transport type. We see that there's 3 options here. There's standard I/O, SSE, server-side events, and streamable HTTP. As we've kind of already looked at in our sample, we're using standard I/O. As Kevin asked with what type of project we're using, it's a simple exe console app. So we will configure it appropriately. And we could target an executable here, but I'm just going to do a simple .NET run, the same way you do with your console application. I'm going to do .NET run -- project to target my project. I'm going to copy my full path to my project. And I can paste that in here. And I'm going to tack a no build on the end, just simply so that if I launch this in multiple instances, I don't have conflicts with the binaries trying to copy over. So it allows me to run this multiple times at the same time. So I just have to make sure I build first, which I've done, and I will hit connect. So now that we've connected, we can now see that there's an option to list the tools available to us. So this button is now listing the tools that we define in our code with the MCP server tool attribute. There's more than you'd expect here, and I haven't shown these all. We're only going to look at the add one for now. If we click on the add tool, which is the one that we looked at, we notice that it take 2 parameters that it takes, and we can fill them in and execute the tool. So I could pass in a 4 and a 5. We can run the tool, and we see it passes back a string. The sum of 4 and 5 is 9. Does this match with our code? I'd say, yes, it matches exactly with what our code was doing. Let's go check this out on the VS Code side. We're maybe a little more familiar with looking at this on the VS Code side. We'll dive into this MCP inspector a little bit more, but let's just show this running in real life. So I've opened up a brand new, just blank folder on VS Code, has nothing in it, and I want to add my newfound tool that we've created into my GitHub Copilot instance. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-P, hit MCP add server, going to select the standard I/O protocol, because that's what we currently have. I'm going to type in the same command we ran in the other one on the inspector, so -- project, with my project target. And then I'm going to once again tack on the no build on that, just once again so I don't have conflicts between the inspector and the VS Code or any other instances of this I want to run. I can then call this whatever I want. We'll call it MCP.NET sample. And then I'm going to say, do I want all instances of my VS Code to be able to access this MCP server, or only with the ones in this folder? In this case, I'm going to just choose this folder, this workspace, so we can take a look at this JSON file a little closer. And in VS Code, you configure your MCP servers that GitHub Copilot here on the right can talk to using this MCP JSON. We see that it just was a shortcut there, but it has the name of our MCP server, the type, the command, the arguments, and we see that it is running. So we have some basic tools here to stop, restart, and we also see the tools that it has available to us. If I go down into my GitHub Copilot, it has a configure tools button. I have a whole bunch of MCP servers installed, but if I've unclicked them all using this button at the top, and I've hunted down my one MCP server that we just made. We called it MCP.NET sample. And I'm going to select our one tool, the add tool, and hit OK. Don't make the mistake of clicking outside of this little window because it will lose your selection. You have to hit OK. It's not my preference of the UI design, but we go with it. So we can select any of our models, and now I can ask our AI agent, hey, can you tell me what 8 plus 9 is? So it's going to calculate 8 plus 9 for us. And look at that. What it's suggesting is I want to run the add tool provided to us by the MCP.NET sample, and it's giving the input of 8 and 9. This is exactly what we want. Now, every time that an MCP server loads up into VS Code, it's going to give you this prompt of, do you want to allow this tool or not? Because you could do malicious things with it, it's going to give you that. In this case, I really trust my add function, and it's running locally on my computer. So I'm going to say we're always going to allow this tool, and now has that capability. So it's going to run that tool, and it says, perfect, 8 plus 9 is 17. We can also take a slight peek as to what it got. So it passed in 8 and 9, and the output it got is our string once again. So we have now given our tool straight to VS Code. Our AI agent in VS Code is using our tool that we wrote, using a console application with less than 5 or so additional lines of code in one package. Pretty powerful and doesn't take much to get there. Any questions at this point? Joshua?
Did you click on use 3 references? I just want to see what it said.
Yeah. So this is going and using some, so you can configure your instructions either at, once again, kind of like the MCP servers, globally or inside your project. I have some pre-canned instructions I give to all my instances. One is called self-explanatory code commenting. I'm telling AI, don't do too much commenting, only comment when you need it, because I find it does a little too much. The other is called taming Copilot. Maybe that's self-explanatory of what that kind of instructions lead to. Any other questions?
How did you get to the ad server again? I must have missed that.
No problem. So if you hit Control-Shift-P in VS Code and you type in MCP add server, it'll kind of walk you through that flow.
Excellent. I appreciate it.
No problem. If you want to check it out, so like so I have this VS Code MCP JSON file, so that configures all my servers available in this workspace. But if I want to go find all my servers globally, if you hit MCP list servers, and then you can actually go this a different way. But I can select one of the servers, I can say show its configuration, and you can see, oh, here's my configuration for all the servers I have available to my AI agent across my entire computer. I think you can also search for it otherwise, yeah. Open user configuration. Any other question, Dan?
So when you have the run, why are you returning a string as opposed to just a single int, right? Because if it's an add function, like in a normal project, right, an add function would be you return the answer as opposed to a string that's like the answer is.
Yeah.
Obviously that's from Copilot or.
Somewhat arbitrary in this case.
Okay.
So it knows what it passed in, so I could just return the int. I'm just having a little fun with it, giving a string. It is not a requirement by any means.
Because I obviously you'll get into it like an ASP.NET, but like you can decorate your normal methods with it, and you expect normal methods to not return strings, decorating how you actually return things. But have you run it with numbers? Because sometimes when I've tried creating MCP servers, and the problem is this step right here, where I say, now do the thing I just told you have a tool for, and then it's like, I can do that, great. I know exactly what I need to do, and then not go out to the MCP server.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? Like,
It's not choosing the right tool at the right time.
it's not choosing the tool, even though that's the only tool it has, but it says, oh, I can do that myself.
Yeah.
And I don't know if the tool was not hyper-specific enough, like adding, right?
Mhm.
If you're adding something, it's very easy to know if you're adding, but like some things where it's like, oh, I need to do this model inspector and have a better knowledge of the database behind. But I could probably get into it, but the reason is the configuration around the actual function of the MCP is the part that I've had troubles with.
Yeah. So.
The method signature of like what it returns, the description.
Uh-huh.
For your custom built
For
MCP?
a custom build, it doesn't always shell out to it like it should.
Yeah. I've done int before, but maybe I ran a success case. I'd be happy at the end. We should go try it at the end and do it one more time. We can nothing wrong with live demos. That never goes wrong.
Well, what's obviously interesting about this is all the default language processing that you're getting, right? Because the answer didn't say, hey, your result is blah, blah, blah. It said 8 plus 9 equals 17 is your result, right? So it trimmed out all the extra text that you could put in, there. By the same token, you would imagine under normal cases, the reason you're using an MCP and not just an API is because you're expecting there's more language that you want back that's going to get used and processed and et cetera. So
I can give an additional context, and I can point the AI agent in a certain way based off of my return. So I could say, in this case, this was the way I got to I could expose an add function that's somehow super complicated and actually does PEMDAS or something. I could say, this is how I got to my solution. And I could explain that all out, still write out the result. And now AI, if I said, wait, how did you do that? It could then use that information as a return out of the MCP server to do that. So you do have additional flexibility where it's not just like a calculator and you just want straight results. Context is helpful a lot of times with AI. In terms of it not choosing the right, so Dan, you're asking about sometimes it's not choosing my tool for me. There's a multitude of things that can play into that. In our case right now, it is very likely that it's going to choose the right tool because I have one tool selected. And one of the big advantages to the newer LLMs that are coming out, yes, they're getting smarter, but their ability to use tools is growing significantly. And so if you go back to like a year ago and you drop one of those LLMs in, it's not going to perform nearly as well. So one, we don't have many tools for it to choose from. It's like, I don't know if you guys have seen Top Gear, but you have like Jeremy Clarkson who pulls out a hammer for any job and he has the one tool, and AI kind of looks at the same thing. If you're asking it to do addition and it only has one tool, it goes, well, I guess this is the thing I'm going to try to use to make this work. The description and the name help as well.
Do the parameter names affect the weight of it at all?
In this case, it's just a naming thing. It can help it know which input goes in. So if we have, trying to think of a method that would make it matter. It would matter if like those were specific, like you had to drop the right thing in the right place. So if you have two strings that are capitalized left string and lowercase right string, you should name the parameters so that it can figure out, oh, I should put the left string in the one that's going to capitalize and the right string in the one that doesn't. Insert better example there. First name, last name. That's a great example. So parameter names are helpful. I did not do good naming here in this case because addition's going to work either way.
it was good enough.
Exactly. Joshua.
So, I mean, you might not know because it's probably under the covers of GitHub Copilot, but do you know how it knows to call that the MCP function in the first place? Does it like add the description as context for it? Say, hey, this is a tool you're given, and you can call this.
Yeah, that's exactly how it works. So you have your system prompt, you have your user prompt that comes in that says, in our case, hey, can you tell me what 8+9 is? And then it iterates through all the tools and servers it has available to it, and it passes those into the context. Then the AI agent at some point, it's streaming back tokens to us. In this case, it says, I'll calculate 8+9 for you. Then it passes back a special token that indicates to the host, so we had our host and our client, and it passes that back to VS Code, and it says, make a call to the add function. You told me that there's an add function, and you can pass in these two parameters and use 8 and 9 in those two places. Functionally, what we get in that input window. And then that token gets passed to the MCP client locally that then takes that, passes it into the function, into the right format, proxies it over to the server, and lets the server execute. But yes, the information that what tools are available gets shoved into the context, into the LLM. Slightly differently, but functionally the same way that anything else gets passed to an LLM. Good question. Any other questions? Okay. So sometimes, for me at least, when something doesn't completely make sense and there seems to be some magic, like as Phil alluded to, we threw on some attributes and things are magically working. Sometimes I don't understand why. Like, is my function actually getting called? What's happening here? I find it's often a good time to step into the code and see what's actually going on. So let's hop back to the MCP inspector. just for sake of having my live code in this case, this is not necessary. I'm going to stop this other one, just drop the no build just to make sure we have our live code as in our Visual Studio instance. And I'm going to reconnect. Wait for it to build. There we go. And now if I hop over to Visual Studio and I hit debug, attach to process, and I go hunt for my server, I notice I only have one executable running, MCP.NET sample running from Node, which is where our model context protocol inspector is running from, and I'm going to attach that process. Wow, the zooming here is, we're going to find our button. Okay. There we go. We made it. Okay. So now we've attached to the process. So let's add a debug point on our one line that exists. And then let's go hit our, what's our error here? Unexpected token. So we're just going to stop, restart our inspector, disconnect our, it's already disconnected for us, fantastic. We're going to try connecting one more time. Great, we're connected again. You can go back to Visual Studio. We're going to reattach back to, hopefully that works. I'm going to be amazed if it does. Maybe it worked. Okay, we're going to go back to the inspector. We're going to list our tools. We're going to find our add tool. We're going to pass in our two numbers. And we're going to hope that Visual Studio connected to the right process. So here we see literally what's happened is our numbers have come into our function, and they've been set as parameters. And I now have the full capabilities of anything you can imagine you can do in a normal method call. This is not some dark magic. It's not like this is being abstracted away somewhere. This is a literal method call happening in our C# code. Also, I think there's some delay of something happening because my parameters were called A and B, and I've now changed them. Weird things are happening, but that's okay. Kind of cool that we're actually here in our code. Okay, so we've now debugged. We stepped through. I shouldn't have exited that quickly, timed out because we took too long and I just exited, and we've done all that. We now have seen a basic add call. Let's extend our functionality. So jumping back to our PowerPoint real quick. So before, we had a simple just talking to our MCP server. It did addition in memory, passed it back. We're going to go one layer farther, and we're going to have our MCP server still be talking over standard I/O, but now we're going to allow it to use our local data on our system, specifically our file system. So we're going to build, or I've built, and we're going to walk through a little code snippet tool. So I want AI to be able to remember code snippets that it's written, and then be able to bring them back from my file system over time. So I can. Okay, I'll try not to wave the microphone about as I talk. I'm working on that one. I'm working on it. AI is actually building that one for me as we speak. Okay, so keyboard's a lot harder. 1 second. There we go. Okay, so we've now built one that acts on our local machine using standard I/O, interacting with our local data system. We're now going to go into the next example, which is we're going to use HTTP now instead of standard I/O to interact. For this case, we're going to make our .NET sample MCP server, instead of being a console app, be an ASP.NET app, as you typically would. Once again, we're going to inject in the C# SDK for MCP, and we're going to allow it to, in our case virtually, interact with cloud data, GitHub. So I've noticed a problem. I don't know if you've ever messed around with the GitHub MCP server, but I ask AI to create a GitHub issue, and I say, AI, make a GitHub issue and clearly put it in Kevin's name. And it goes, okay, I'll go do that for you. And it tries to assign Kevin to the issue, but the GitHub MCP server requires the GitHub username to be used. So it tries to pass in Kevin and goes, I don't know who Kevin is. I don't know what you're talking about. I clearly know Kevin. I have no idea what Kevin's GitHub name is. This is an issue. I think there's a case where we could fix this, though. If we build a small little function that allows us to search the users in our organization by name, because we know their names, and it gets back their GitHub user IDs, guess what? I can now say, GitHub AI, go assign this issue to Kevin. It's able to look up that username and now assign it to Kevin. So I'm no longer just solving a problem for me. I'm extending the functionality of other MCP servers, and they're lacking with our MCP server. So let's see what this looks like currently. So in our current workflow, thank you. Shift F5 would have been better. How'd that happen? This display is not currently on. I can't actually even see this display. Fixing. There we go. Duplicate. Yeah, we keep coming up with some fantastic ideas. If we have enough time, we're gonna be doing a lot. Okay. There we go. Back up and running. Fantastic. Sorry about that. Okay. So let's show this example. So I'm going to stay in my GitHub, in my VS Code context. I'm going to go search for and enable the create issue tool provided us by GitHub, and I'm going to ask it, can you make a, typing is slower too with one hand, can you make an issue and assign it to Kevin? Let's see what it goes and does. Okay, so it wants a repository owner. Let's give it IntelliTect / essential C#. See if it figures out the right thing. So it figures out the right repository, but we see it's trying to pass in Kevin. I really hope this doesn't try to assign random user Kevin, but we'll see. It's possible. Great, it failed. Okay, that's good. Yes. So it says the username. We made it. Okay, we've gotten past the gauntlet. I was hoping that would be the case, that it'd take over, but we're good. So it failed to create. So if we jump back to our code sample, we have a second project. In our second project, let's hop into our program again, and we notice some very, very similar attributes. I've once again, as I mentioned, brought into the MCP server, MCP C# SDK. And where before we used the with standard IO transport, we now say we're using HTTP transport. Before Kevin asked, this is a web project. This is a simple .NET New web. And we are once again just going to add on the line for with tools from assembly, which is going to look up those attributes once again. So let's dive into our tools. I have a tool now called GitHub Users I Know tool. And all this tool is doing is now using dependency injection even. So I can now, it's still full C#, everything you could do as you normally could with C#. I can use dependency injection to take an interface that is going to give me, that has the functionality to go out to GitHub, call the OctoKit or GitHub API, search the users in my organization, because it knows what organizations I'm a part of, and pull that back the users. In this case today, we've abstracted all that complexity away with a dictionary, but insert functionality there. To run our HTTP example, we're actually going to run it just like you would a ASP.NET app. So I'm just going to launch our server. And it's going to open up on another screen, but it doesn't matter because it's just an endpoint. All that an MCP server is on ASP.NET is a single endpoint. That's what this last magical function does, map MCP. It's saying, where am I going to send the MCP calls? Where should I be listening to those from? If I pass in, currently this is on just root, but if I pass in something like /MCP, you then could insert thing here. You could have intelitech.com/MCP, and now we have an MCP server available at intelitech.com/MCP. So that just does the mapping to that. So we've launched our ASP.NET app, and now let's go back to our wonderful MCP inspector. And we're going to change our transport type. We're no longer using standard I/O. We're now using streamable HTTP. In this case, our ASP.NET server is running locally at 5028. And once again, it's running at the root. We've only mapped it to the root. We didn't map it to an additional URL there, but we could. So let's try connecting. Connected very quickly. And I'm going to list the tools available to us. We have two tools, it turns out. We have the echo tool, and we have the lookup GitHub username tool. So let's just try testing this. I just built this tool, haven't tested it. Let's try searching for Kevin. GitHub username for Kevin is Kibu, it turns out. Wonderful. It's gotten a lot smarter. Let's say we have more Kevins inside our organization. Can it distinguish between multiple Kevins? Okay, it can also search by last name as well. Luckily, in this case, turns out we only have one Kevin. Makes it easy, but I can do both things. So my tool seems like it's working pretty okay. Let's go bring this into my real AI agent and try this again. So now we need to add additional MCP server. So I'm going to once again click Control-Shift-P. And then we're going to select Add Server. You also see there's a button at the bottom when you're on the MCP JSON file. Add Server, HTTP. In this case, I can just copy-paste over my URL from our inspector. We can call it, let's call it mcp.net sample.asp for no other reason, just a matter of project structure, but this can be arbitrary. And let's once again make it local. So now we see we have our second MCP server available in our local window. We see it added the configuration. Now if we go configure our tools, we can see there's an additional MCP server available, our ASP.NET one, and all the tools are available to AI. They are going to get injected into its context. So now let's try asking the exact same question. Let's copy this piece out, the repo out. Let's give it a new window. Let's give it the exact same prompt. We're going to give it the repo this time so it doesn't have to ask us. And let's ask it to go do its work. So now first it's looking up Kevin's username. So it's searching for Kevin. It's using our tool. It's going over HTTP locally to our instance. It's successfully gotten back the name. It's going to look up the repo, create the issue. Fantastic, it's created an issue. And if we go view this issue, we see that Kevin has officially been assigned more work. Fantastic. This is always the goal. Yeah. Everyone clone this repo, run really quickly. So just like we have this running locally. You can imagine that the steps for us to go from a local MCP server to a remote MCP server is as complicated as deploying your standard ASP.NET app into the web. The most complicated part is the auth. This is handled using OAuth. It takes a couple more calls. I'm not going to show it in this case, but that is provided to you also by the MCP SDK. And then you can have authentication against your remote MCP server. Multiple people can access it. And so soon you can expect to see this MCP server that exposes Kevin's username available on the public for anyone to use. It's as easy as that. So that's kind of our high-level overview of the power of MCP servers. We've now not only we've extended a very troubling weakness of AI where it doesn't know how to do simple addition. We've now also given it capabilities for problems I have where I'm like, I've written this beautiful piece of code, AI do this for me. And we've now also solved our biggest issue, which is I don't have enough time to solve all my issues. Now Kevin can be assigned to solve all the issues for me. Any questions at this point? We've kind of covered quite a bit of ground horizontally between or locally about how that works. Dan.
Can you have a ASP.NET app that has mapping with MCP and map controllers?
100%. So you can have a normal ASP.NET app, has all your standard controllers, and you can map your MCP endpoint to one of those paths on your existing website. So I could have Intelitech.com, it has all the existing things, or EssentialC# has all the existing things, and I can map that endpoint to typical one we find today is /MCP, but whatever endpoint you want, and that is now available functionality for everyone to use. Great question. Any other questions at this point? Joshua?
You know, if we think about business software that
Mhm.
happens to be web-based, I don't have to, I have all that context that's available to me on the other side. Again, context might not be the best word for that. All the functionality on the server side that I do need to wrap in what's my method, what are my parameters, what's my description, right? And you know, I'm thinking about, you know, classic business software that we create. You know, if I want to add MCP capability to that server, all right, great. This makes it fairly straightforward, but it's still, you know, if I've got, let's say, 100 API endpoints, you know, don't just go tagging. You probably don't just want to go tag all of those 100 API endpoints with, you know, MCP tool.
Yeah.
And all done.
100%. So the comment or question that Phil has there is, I have existing infrastructure enterprise software. It has hundreds, maybe thousands of APIs. You didn't really ask a good question, but we don't really want to go slap these magical attributes on all those existing API endpoints, existing methods that maybe expose the API endpoint, so you have the parameters there, and ship it off to some endpoint on my website and say, have at it. And you're exactly correct. AI it's kind of like if I feel like I can dabble around cars and I'm like, I know my wrenches, I can change my oil. If you walk me into a mechanic shop and they have one of those big snap-on drawer things with 50 shelves, I'm like, I have no idea what tool to use. There's too many options. I can't figure it out. Same thing is true with AI. If you shove too many tools into its context, it starts to know, I don't know which tool to use when. I'm pulling out the hammer when I need to be checking electrical, and it's just chaos. More likely, it stops choosing your tools altogether. So you really have to be intentional about when are you going to expose out a tool for MCP functionality. In addition, you also want to be careful as to MCP really is exposing out tools for the AI to be able to execute. So we haven't covered this, and I'll talk about this a little bit, but there's 3 aspects that MCP server can expose. It can expose tools, prompts, and resources. All we've dealt with here is tools. And tools are given to the AI, and AI can execute tools functionally itself. It says, I want to execute this tool, let's go execute it. You still have to give permission, but relatively low barrier there. So you also have to be aware that AI now, anything you're exposing to the MCP is functionally, for lack of a better term, now just given to AI, and it can go execute arbitrarily that thing. It's up to the client, the host, to implement, the allow button or similar. Nothing about the protocol as an authentication is preventing the AI from just going and if you expose the delete database endpoint, guess what? AI could go ahead and smack that hammer. So you do have to be careful. You want to be intentional, and you don't want to just blindly go do it. You want to figure out what tools are useful to the users and to AI problems that they're actually going to solve.
Or whatever the scenario is, right? Because you're looking at VS Code here as the client,
Mm-hmm.
but the client could be AI Foundry, where
100%.
tying
pretty much limitless. The fact that we get dropped into a literal function, we still have dependency injection, we have all the things that we're used to, means we can do. I can't think of a limit of what you can do. Yeah, new user onboard them. I have a.
What department are they in? Oh, maybe you can recommend for me where they should be provisioned. Okay, great.
Or
I'll approve these 6 places that you came up with, but not these other 3.
exactly, or even like I have a remote database. All you have to pass in a string. You can go explore the SQL server. I'm not sure saying I advise you just letting AI go execute SQL, but you could literally do even that.
Well, but again, that's also a case in point, right, where just sending AI at a simple schema, fine, it's going to be able to inspect it. But if you've got a screwy schema, good luck. You're going to need some wrapper on it. I think, as you alluded to earlier, to describe, what the schema actually is and what it does,
Yeah.
and how to use it, and all kinds of other stuff.
Yeah, and so you're kind of bringing up this idea of what if my schema is weird with the database. The nice part is, once again, I wouldn't advise you make a public MCP server that allows you to AI to execute arbitrary SQL. But if I just say, hey, this is a MS SQL Server database, for example, it doesn't matter what the schema is, because if you give it that tool in the tool chest to just say execute SQL, it can go now figure out your screwy schema itself and backtrace. You don't need to, theoretically, you should have good schema, but it could go figure it out then. It has enough tools at that point to be able to execute. Now, if you have a weird schema, you just say add to table, and then you might run into problems. But there's this weird in between where you could open it up enough, but you have to be careful.
Could you go more into the other types that MCP server seems to use tools,
Yep.
resources,
Yep.
and
Prompts.
prompts? 'Cause a lot of the things that Phil is talking about feels like a resource. You're not actually doing things. You want to find out what the user's trying to get at, right? So
Yep.
the first couple MCP prompts would be like, oh, I want to onboard a new user. Okay, I need to, as the MCP server, go and harvest the data that I need. I need to go and say, okay, go find my resource of the type of user,
Mhm.
see what I need to get from this person, and then it's kind of now back and forth. And then eventually there's going to be at the end a tool. I have all the parameters. Do the thing. Send it my way.
Mhm.
But can you go a little more in depth with what the other one would be? Like the
Sure.
prompts
Yeah.
make sense, but
Before we do that, I want to make sure anything with tools, I'll repeat Dan's question in a second, but I want to make sure any questions with tools while we're at tools before we go dive a layer deeper that we've covered everything we have. So we have HTTP, standard IO. We're dealing with what are called MCP tools, allowing AI to go execute something itself. Any questions around any of that? Joshua?
So, I don't know, it all feels so complex. I'm trying to think about, like, how this would be set up. Should it be set up in the same, I guess, project as maybe an API for Essential C#?
Yeah.
Like, the MCP server might be used for just devs within, like, just you, or maybe it's used elsewhere publicly. But I guess my question is, what is the guideline around, should that be maybe a separate service altogether? But I guess then it could also access services within that same project. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure what the guideline is.
Yeah, so the question is, there's a lot of stuff happening here. Would it be best to add it into my existing project, my existing service, or should it be something on its own? And I don't know if there's a right answer there. That's kind of an architectural level question of we have to look at the instance and the circumstance that we're in to decide what's to happen. Like, am I going to have a publicly hosted MCP server that exposes some resource that everyone around the world can use, such as the Microsoft Learn Docs? I might want the MCP server to kind of just live in like a Docker container kind of thing that can be in a serverless cloud thing so that it can scale up and down as much as it wants, and we don't really have to think about it. It can just, people can throw whatever they want and it just works. Something like Essential C#, a book that has a website, I might be like, our users are low enough in the circumstances where I would just add it into the ASP.NET app. I'd add on the attributes and I'd say, let's expose out /MCP and expose out the tooling that way. That's actually on its way. We're working on that. To be allow an MCP server so that you can access all the information of Essential C# inside the context of your AI window. So like in that case, I'm taking an existing ASP.NET app,
I'm tagging the 3 parameters, the SDK, and bringing in 3 parameters, mapping it appropriately to wherever I want to map it to, decorating some functions that can do what I want it to, and I'm done. I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I don't know if there is like a one-size-fits-all in this case of how you should handle that.
I think the other part that you were talking about, like, oh, but I have so much code that I have existing that I do want to leverage, right? But it doesn't have to be the same cost schema, right? You can have maybe a single solution, different projects, right? You could have this private endpoint here, different authorization schema, that public endpoint, or you have a private API, and then you want a public MCP to describe your private API. However you want to do it, but projects, because you're in code, projects and solutions allow you to do whatever you want, right? You can reference a project, now you have the code. Or it can be remote code and it's only ever talking on the internet, but you get to decide that, and that's, I think, the powerful part. But then, like, I think, like Ben said, typically, right, an off case, you probably don't need some serverless MCP that can scale up to 10,000 requests a second. Just throw it in the same project just for ease of use, right? It's just a single extra call, an extra SDK, and away you go. And then as you need, go beyond that. But I think start simple. Start where it's usable. Is my recommendation.
Dan brings up a great point about how it's always best to start simple, and we can use our existing auth flow and still within ASP.NET, guess what? We can spin out into different auth flows. That is something specific about MCP maybe, is it uses the OAuth flow. So for example, Essential C#, I keep bringing back to that, but that uses a cookie auth flow for your UI login, and that is we're not able to use that for MCP. So we have to say, when you hit the MCP endpoint, go use OAuth flow and use ASP.NET to route that appropriately. Gets a little tricky in like that kind of case if you just didn't use OAuth all the way through, but you can still do it.
To use the MCP, you've got a validated user.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas to go browse the Essential C#, you can be anonymous.
Yep, so Essential C#, you can be anonymous to browse. There's some additional functionality, like there's an AI chat that's powered by the book, the context of the book. You have to be a logged-in user to do that, and you have to follow the cookie auth flow. That's kind of your default ASP.NET auth flow. MCP, though, doesn't support that. It only supports OAuth, so we're kind of spinning up another flow, unfortunately, which is the OAuth flow to allow only authenticated users to use the MCP resource. In our case, it's because we back it with some...
If I'm signed into, no, obviously, I'm just going to ask the question. I don't know what the answer is, so I'm going to ask the question. So I'm in VS Code, I've authenticated as me.
Mm-hmm.
As long as I'm a user, is that going to pass in because of the way the MCP server is defined? It's going to know, oh, I'm going to pass the generated token and pass it to...
Yeah, so the question is around the auth flow from my interaction in VS Code. So I think the best example is maybe the GitHub MCP server. So the GitHub MCP server, you're logged into VS Code with a GitHub user. So that seems like a really easy flow. You pass along your credential, and that's not how it's implemented. When you first start the MCP server, the GitHub MCP server, it says something like, hey, do you want to go visit the internet, or however you want to do your auth flow? Typically internet, it says, let's launch you to the website. You do your auth flow, passes back its token, and VS Code stores that for the MCP server. So it's not just passing through, it's not like Windows auth where it's passing it all the way through. It's going to have you do a separate flow for the MCP server itself. So same thing. Yep, and that's the host. Yep, that's the host in this case that's storing that. So the host being VS Code. So thing on the left, the host is storing storing your token and using that when it passes it to the client and going to the server. Exactly.
I would expect both VS Code and Visual Studio to get better off flows, because right now it's bolted on, not built in.
Yeah.
Right? It's, okay, now I need another auth token. Let me go sign in when I just signed in to the
Yeah.
GitHub account. I would expect it to be eventually built in as opposed to bolted on.
And it's a little bit of a weird case where then you have to be like, you have to go inspect the MCP server almost and go, does this use a GitHub auth flow versus another? Like, it's a little bit of a weird case to try to do pass-through. So yeah, we'll see where it goes. But currently it is I start MCP server, I go through a typical auth flow, I get sent out to my browser, log in, pass back token, host manages that, and I'm off to the races. So, any other questions? This is great. I don't remember if there was something else on this, but okay. So Dan had a question about tools versus prompts versus resources. And I want to make sure we still got plenty of time. Great. So we've only dealt with tools so far, and the biggest distinction when we look at tools versus resources and prompts is the executor. So when we give tools, or when we expose, let me rephrase this. When we expose tools from our MCP server, we're giving a ability to an AI, an LLM, to be able to do something. When we expose a resource, we expose an ability for an application to do something. That's like my VS Code instance or similar. It's kind of up to the host. Moving farther down that, prompts, that is giving an ability for a user to do something. So that's just allowing me to do to input a prompt. I can actually show this because I've spun up a prompt one. So I'll start with the prompt one because that's the easiest one. Resources one, still in my mind, like I get it, but I'm still like, there's a lot of cases, there's not many cases where I truly want to use resources. So let's start with the prompt one because that's easier, and then we can jump to the middle case. So if I open up my VS Code, you won't have this here, but I have I should have, maybe it's before here. Okay, I can go find it. I have a instance where I have a MCP server called my everything MCP server because it has everything, aptly named. There it is. So if I go grab my everything MCP server, I don't even know where this is. Order by date modified. We're going to find this. How hard can it be? That's not going to ever work. Let's go grab. I do have the everything tool. I could use that as well. Let's go grab a simple example off of the C# SDK. We haven't actually gone and looked at that. But if we go look at so currently we're at our mcp.net sample repo. And in the README, we have a couple resources around this topic. One of this is the MCP C# repository. And this has a bunch of fantastic samples, including the everything server that has everything implemented, as you can imagine. So I'm just going to download this code, save it, and we'll pull it up. Not extracting. Okay, and then I'm going to go grab the samples, everything. I'm going to grab the CSproj file. All I have to do, once again, is copy the path. I can drop into my VS Code. And I'm going to replace my MCP.NET sample just for sake of our experience here. Nope, let's go through the normal flow. I don't want to have to escape that. So I'm going to add server, add standard ISO server. We're going to call it everything. Oh, there's a command. .NET run project. Typing with one hand is not recommended. It's a little bit slower. No, it's all good. We're getting through this. Okay. There we go. We're going to call this my everything server. And we're going to keep it in our workspace. Oh, goodness. Okay, I'm going to go faster this time because There we go. Okay. Yes, I'm going to blindly trust it for now. So this exposed 7 tools and 2 prompts. So if I want to take a look at how prompts work, I can do / in VS Code, and I know what these prompts are already called, so I'm cheating, but we could click here and go look at them. But these prompts, there's 2 prompts that are available here. One is called the simple prompt. If I hit the simple prompt, this is a method in C# that returns a string. It looks exactly like the tool. It has a different attribute on it. We can go look at this. And it's going to inject in a prompt. In this case, this is a simple prompt without arguments because this is a simple prompt without arguments. I also have the ability to add complex prompts. These are, as we can imagine with our tool, allows us to pass in parameters into our method call that change the behavior of the prompt that's actually returned. This is really powerful, I think, because it means that I can now we could host as a company or something, you could host an MCP server that contains prompts that you customize using these to get the best prompt back, and everyone has access to it, and they're live updating because it's on a hosted MCP server. So in this case, this one, it's not set up for this currently, so it won't totally execute, but you can imagine I can go through this drop-down options. I can select my temperature, my output style, and it could resolve a prompt. It's not doing this because I don't have this set up fully because we just download the repo, but you can understand that. A resource, on the other hand, instead of the LLM saying, I have access to this resource, a resource, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain this, it's VS Code using the MCP server, you're actually with VS Code, to be able to then go look up, instead of the LLM going and directly kind of looking up via the tool, it's using intermediate. So if I have a file out on a remote server and it has some updated changes of a template, so like a new .NET template has a standard ASP.NET thing, and I've been building my ASP.NET project for 2 years, and the template's gotten better. There's some cool things there. I could use a resource to expose out that program CS file from that template into there, so my AI now has context and is given additional context to be able to look at that, say, I now know about this live resource out there. I didn't have to go execute a tool. It was brought into my context through the abilities exposed out through the MCP server, and I can now then, and the AI is now just has additional context, and so now I could go look at your program CS file, update it using the new technologies and abilities that were given in the new program CS file out on that template. Resources, I don't have a great explanation off the top of my head of how to explain this, but that's maybe a high-level conceptual.
Is Context 7 a resource?
Context 7 is a tool. So Context 7 is a tool. It's exposing out. So Context 7 is a very popular MCP server right now. It exposes out 2 tools, one with a parameter that says, or one that's tool that's called search for repository, something like that, and it's passing a parameter, and you just pass in, AI passing in the keywords that it expects, so model context protocol, and we could actually we could do this quickly.
So again, just to kind of cut to the chase, so the resource then would be something a more specific entity, item, something like that.
Yep. It's more stat. That's a great way. Yep.
Statically getting it from, like, technically a database. If you're doing a read, you execute something. You give it a tool to the AI to execute into the database. But if it's, like you said, a file or more static, but it's not always static, but that's how I think of it.
Yeah. I think that's a great way to think about it. I unfortunately don't have just a great example off the top of my head that solves this problem exactly. The best one I have is kind of that static resource of you could use this to have a hosted template and figure out how do I get my existing code to now match this template, and I could have an MCP server that exposes that existing template. AI now the context of the template can kind of merge the two and do some upgrade kind of behavior there for you. Any further questions on that? Prompts are cool. I like prompts. Prompts are very underutilized. Everyone builds tools these days. Prompts, you can do so much. Like once you find the right prompt, you can do so much with that, and exposing that ability to other people, I think this adds a lot of power to what you're able to do. So, any other questions? Joshua.
So this MCP prompt type,
Yeah. So Joshua's question is the prompts exposed by MCP server similar to having a prompts file on your VS Code instance? And the answer is yes. So when you have a prompt, so I can say new prompt file locally, and I call it foo, because everything starts with foo. And the difference here is I can have a prompt here, and this is now shared. If I want to share with other people, this is shared through committing it to Git, storing GitHub. Anyone who has access to this repo can now access these prompts. So that's maybe good for some very specific prompts to your project. If I say I have some prompts that are like a write tests in .NET and C in .NET prompt. So I have a write test in .NET prompt. That's fantastic. And I can call that prompt, and I could maybe give a drop-down option of what test framework are you using? XUnit, .NET, or NUnit, TUnit, MS Test. And I could then customize the prompt that I found works really effectively with .NET to go then generate out the prompt for you that then you send off to the LLM. So the difference is the accessibility. So if an MCP server hosts it, let's say out on a remote server, anyone who can authenticate to that server or make it open has access and gets live updates of what those prompts are as they update. Versus something like in your VS Code instance or your repo where you have a prompts file, this is now only shared with the people who have access to that repo, have stored it locally. I also, in this case, if it's stored here, like not on my user workspace, I can only use this prompt within this repo. Versus if it's on an MCP server, I could theoretically apply those same prompts that I found work really well to any repo, any workspace that I'm in across my computer. So. Yeah, the difference of running an API locally versus running in the cloud, a lot of it's around the distribution, who can access, how quick is it to update, all those kind of standard things. So, any last questions? Otherwise, we'll leave you with free time. Great. So I hope everyone feels like the barrier to MCP servers has been lowered. It's a little more accessible now. Hopefully it makes a little more sense. Go try this out. Find a problem that you have and solve it using MCP server. For example, I now have the ability, and Kevin will forever hate this, to assign Kevin to all my GitHub issues using natural language. The barrier is lowered. It feels like C# because it is C# and it's just methods. And there's not a whole lot of magic above this that you have to implement to make this happen. So excited to see your guys' MCP servers you build. And that's all I got. Thank you.